The phone rang at 11:14 on a Tuesday night in late October. Right when I had a chisel in one hand and a mouthful of cold pizza I'd been chewing for the better part of 10 minutes because I kept forgetting to swallow. I was in my shop behind the house, working on a built-in bookcase for a client in town. Sawdust all over my boots, a space heater ticking in the corner because Cedar Falls gets mean once the leaves are down. My phone buzzed against the workbench loud enough to rattle a coffee can full of screws. I looked at the screen and felt my stomach drop before I even understood why. Diane Whitcomb. I hadn't heard from Diane in 3 weeks. Not since she'd called to ask if I could look at a leaky gutter before the first frost. I almost let it ring out. There's a version of me that still does that sometimes, lets calls from that family go to voicemail for a few seconds longer than I need to, just to brace myself. I picked it up on the 4th ring. Mason. Her voice came through thin and fast. Nothing like the woman who usually called me to talk my ear off about her tomato plants. I need you to come to the hospital. It's Walter. I was already pulling my jacket off the hook before she finished the sentence. My name's Mason Hale. I'm 33. I run a small renovation company out of a town called Cedar Falls, the kind of place where everybody knows your truck before they know your name. I fix up old houses, mostly. Farmhouses with bad bones. Lake cottages that have been sinking slow into the mud for 60 years. Places nobody else wants to touch because the wirings from the Eisenhower administration and the floor joists have more rot than wood. I like that kind of work. You can't fake your way through it. A house either holds you up or it doesn't, and you find out which pretty quick once you start tearing into the walls. I'd been single for 14 months by then. Not divorced, never married. Just the kind of single that comes after you spend 3 years building a life with somebody and then watch her drive off in a moving truck toward Denver with most of your furniture and all of your good dishes. Her name was Hannah Whitcomb. I'm not going to spend a long time painting her as the villain of this story, because she wasn't one, not really. She took a job offer that was too good to turn down, and I had a business rooted 40 feet into the ground of a town she didn't want to live in anymore. And neither one of us was willing to be the one who folded. That's the whole sad math of it. No affair, no big blow-up, just two people who loved each other and still couldn't make the geography work. What nobody warns you about is that breaking up with someone doesn't automatically break you up with their parents. Walter Whitcomb had been teaching me how to read a tide chart and fillet a lake trout since I was 26 years old. Diane had been feeding me Sunday dinners since before Hannah and I were officially serious, back when I was just the contractor fixing their porch steps and staying for coffee a little too long. After the breakup, I figured that part of my life would quietly close the way most things do. Didn't. Diane kept calling about gutters. Walter kept calling about his boat motor. I kept showing up because turning down people who'd been kind to me for 6 years felt like its own kind of small betrayal, and because, if I'm honest with you, some stubborn corner of me liked still belonging to something that had Hannah's last name on it. I drove to Cedar Falls Memorial doing about 15 over the limit the whole way. Rain coming down sideways against the windshield, wipers working overtime and still losing the fight. Diane was standing under the overhang at the ER entrance when I pulled in. No coat, just a cardigan soaked through at the shoulders. Her gray hair plastered to one side of her face. She looked 60 years old and about 11 years old at the same time, the way people do when the ground drops out from under them. I got out of the truck and she walked straight into me, both arms around my ribs before I'd even shut the door. "He was out at the dock," she said into my jacket, "fixing the cleat that's been loose all summer. I told him to wait for you to do it. I told him." Her voice cracked on the last word and she stopped, breathing hard, trying to put herself back together one piece at a time. "Diane, look at me." I held her by both shoulders the way you'd steady a ladder. "What did the doctors say?" "Heart attack. They're saying it was a moderate one, whatever that means. They've got him stable. They're keeping him overnight, maybe longer." She wiped her face with the back of one wrist. "I drove myself here behind the ambulance and I don't even remember doing it. I went out to my car a minute ago to get my phone charger and I couldn't make myself turn the key. I just sat there." "Hey, that's okay." I took the keys out of her shaking hand before she could try again. "I'm here now." She looked up at me. Rain still beaded in her eyebrows, and something in her face shifted from panic into something closer to relief. The kind that almost looks like grief because it's so heavy with everything that came before it. "I tried calling Hannah 3 times, she said. "Straight to voicemail. There's a storm system over the Rockies. Her flight out of Denver's been delayed twice already. She won't land until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. Diane pressed her lips together. I didn't know who else to call, Mason. I'm sorry. I know it isn't fair to you. Don't, I said. Don't do that. You call me whenever you need to. That hasn't changed and it isn't going to. She nodded like she needed permission to believe that, then let me walk her inside. They led us back to see Walter around midnight. He looked smaller in that hospital bed than I'd ever seen him. Wires taped to his chest, and 4 line in the back of one big calloused hand that I'd watched split firewood and tie boat knots for half my life. He cracked one eye open when we came in and managed half a grin. Well, look what the cat dragged in, he said, voice rough but steady. Diane, did you call the contractor instead of the cardiologist? Hush, Diane said, already crying again, already laughing through it. I'm fine. Tired. Annoyed, they took my coffee away. Walter's eyes found mine over Diane's shoulder, and for a second the joking dropped off his face entirely. Take care of her tonight, he said, quiet enough that it was just for me. She won't sleep in that house alone. She never has, even when I'm just at the hardware store late. I've got it, I told him. We stayed until a nurse ran us off around 1 in the morning, telling us Walter needed rest more than company. Out in the hallway, under buzzing fluorescent lights, Diane stood very still for a second, staring at nothing, the adrenaline finally draining out of her and leaving something hollow behind. I can't go home and be in that house by myself tonight, she said. It wasn't dramatic. It was just true, said the way you'd say it's supposed to rain tomorrow. I know it's a strange thing to ask. I know you don't owe this family anything anymore. She looked up at me, and there was something almost embarrassed in it, like she hated needing to ask. Will you stay the night? At the house. Just tonight. I can't be alone in those rooms with him not in them. I want to tell you I thought it over. I didn't. I'd already half decided in the parking lot. The second I saw her standing under that overhang with no coat on. Yeah, I said. Of course. She let out a breath like she'd been holding it since the phone rang. I followed her car back to the house in mine, both of us driving slow through the wet dark, past the marina, past the hardware store with Whitcomb's son painted on the window even though there'd never been a son, only a daughter who used to roll her eyes about that sign every single time we drove past it together. The house sat at the end of Birch Lane, white clapboard, dark green shutters, a porch light Walter always left burning whether anyone was expected home or not. I hadn't been inside it in 14 months. Walking through that front door again felt like stepping into a museum built around a life I used to half own. Diane's dog, an aging golden retriever named Pickles who used to lose his mind every time my truck pulled into the driveway, came shuffling out from the kitchen, took one look at me, and acted like no time had passed at all. He leaned his whole weight against my legs and groaned with happiness while Diane managed a watery laugh. At least somebody's glad you're here without complications, she said. I didn't ask her what she meant by that. I had a pretty good idea. She showed me to the guest room out of habit, like I hadn't slept in that exact bed a dozen times before, back when Hannah and I were together and her parents still pretended we kept to separate rooms whenever we visited. The quilt on the bed was the same one. The framed photo on the dresser was the same one too. Hannah at 16, gap-toothed and squinting into summer sun on the dock. Taken years before I'd ever shown up in this town with a truck full of tools and no idea what I was walking into. I lay awake a long time that first night listening to an unfamiliar house make familiar sounds. The radiator ticking, Pickles sighing in his sleep down the hall, Diane's door creaking open once around 3 in the morning, her footsteps pausing outside the guest room like she meant to knock and then deciding against it, going back to bed instead. I didn't get up. I figured she just needed to know somebody else was breathing under that roof. That was enough for both of us that night. The next morning, I made coffee in a kitchen I used to consider half mine, in a pot I could have found blindfolded. Diane came down in her robe, eyes swollen but steadier than the night before, and found me standing at the stove flipping eggs like no time had passed. You don't have to feed me too, she said. You're going to need to eat something before that hospital, and you're not going to do it unless somebody puts a plate in front of you. I slid the eggs onto a dish and set it down across from her. So eat. She sat, picked up her fork, looked at it instead of the eggs for a second. Hannah lands at 2, she said. I told her not to rush, that her father's stable, but you know how she is. I did know how she was. Hannah Whitcomb didn't do half measures about the people she loved, which was exactly the problem the last time around, because she'd loved her career the same stubborn way she loved her family, and I'd been the one piece that wouldn't fit into both columns at once. I should head out before she gets here, I said, mostly to my coffee mug. Don't need to make this complicated for you. Diane set her fork down. Mason. She waited until I looked at her. Walter is going to be in that hospital for at least a week, maybe longer with rehab after. The store needs running. The marina contracts need handling before the season closes out. I cannot do all of that and sit at his bedside and also field whatever Hannah's bringing home with her on that flight. She said the last part carefully, like she was choosing each word off a shelf. I would very much like it if you didn't disappear the second she walks through that door. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because the whole rest of the story doesn't make sense if I'm not. I felt scared. Not of Hannah exactly, more of the math of it, the way you feel scared standing at the edge of a roof you know you can jump off safely but every nerve in your body is still screaming at you not to. Diane? I haven't talked to her since the day she left. I'm aware. Diane reached across the table and put her hand over mine. The same gesture she'd used on me at 100 Sunday dinners. I'm not asking you to fix anything between you two. I'm asking you to help me run this family through a hard week. That's all. The rest is between you and her, and frankly, none of my business, even though I clearly think it should still be. I laughed despite myself. You're not subtle. I'm 60 years old with a husband in a hospital bed. Subtlety is the first thing to go. She squeezed my hand once and let go. Will you stay? Help with the store. Help me hold the house together until Walter's back on his feet? I should tell you I had every reason to say no. I had a bookcase half built in my shop and 3 other jobs lined up behind it. I had 14 months of carefully built distance from a woman who'd handed my old life back to me in cardboard boxes. But I'd also spent 14 months missing a family that had felt more like mine than my own ever had. And Diane was sitting across from me with red-rimmed eyes asking for help in the only language that family ever really spoke, which was showing up. Okay, I said, I'll stay. I want you to picture the next thing that happened the way it actually happened, not the way you'd write it in a movie. Hannah didn't walk through that door looking glamorous and tragic with rain in her hair. She walked through it at 2:45 that afternoon. Flight delayed twice and then rerouted through Chicago, hauling one rolling suitcase with a broken wheel that screeched against the hardwood. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair scraped back in a knot that had given up sometime around her second layover. She looked exhausted and furious at the universe and absolutely nothing like the polished photos she still occasionally posted, the ones I'd made myself stop checking somewhere around month 9. She dropped her suitcase the second she saw me standing in her parents' kitchen with a dish towel over one shoulder. Mason. Just that. My name, flat, like she wasn't sure whether it was a question or a fact she was confirming out loud. Hey, Hannah. For a second, neither of us moved. Pickles broke the standoff by barreling past me to greet her, and that gave us both something to look at besides each other. She crouched down and buried her face in his fur for a long moment, and I watched her shoulders shake once before she got it under control. Mom called you, she said into the dog's neck. Not quite a question. She did. Of course she did. Hannah stood up, wiped her eyes fast with the back of her wrist. The exact same gesture her mother had used the night before. The kind of thing you don't notice runs in a family until you've loved both women in it. Where is she? Hospital. She wanted to be there when you landed, but your dad insisted she go nap for an hour first. He's apparently a tyrant about other people's sleep schedules even from a hospital bed. That got the smallest crack of a smile out of her. Gone almost as fast as it came. How is he? Really? Stable? Talking? Complaining about the coffee? Giving everybody a hard time. The doctor's calling it moderate, whatever that means medically. They want to keep him a few more days, maybe start cardiac rehab after. I kept my voice level, the voice I use on job sites when a client's about to panic over a quote. He's gonna be okay, Hannah. She nodded fast. 3 times. Like she was trying to make herself believe it through repetition. Then her eyes moved to the dish towel on my shoulder, to the eggs pan still drying in the rack, to the general fact of me standing comfortably in her parents' kitchen like 14 months hadn't happened. You're staying here, she said. Your mom asked me to, just until your dad's back on his feet. I figured I'd help keep the store running, handle some things around the house so she's not stretched thin. I shrugged, trying to make it sound smaller than it felt. I can find a hotel if that's easier for you. No, she said it fast, then looked almost surprised at herself for saying it that fast. No, it's fine. It's not your fault. My mother has zero boundaries. A pause. It's good of you, actually, staying. It's just helping out, right? She held my gaze a beat too long for either of us to call it nothing. Just helping out. We didn't talk about us that first night or the night after that. There wasn't room to. The next 4 days moved fast and exhausting. The kind of stretch where grief and logistics get tangled together so tight you can't tell which one's making you tired. I opened the hardware store every morning at 7, ran the register with Diane's part-time clerk, fielded calls from marina customers wondering if their slip contracts would still get renewed on schedule. Hannah split her time between the hospital and the house, handling insurance calls and rehab scheduling with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd built a whole career out of managing other people's chaos for a living. In the evenings, the three of us, sometimes four when Walter was discharged on day 6 and came home in a wheelchair he hated, would end up around that kitchen table eating whatever Diane and I had cobbled together, talking about everything except the obvious things sitting in the room with us. It was the small moments that got me, the way these stories always go. Reaching into the same cabinet for 2 mugs one morning and finding Hannah's hand already there. Both of us freezing for a second before she pulled back first this time. Cheeks pink, muttering something about needing the bigger mug today. Standing on the dock together at dusk on the 4th day, checking the cleat Walter had been fixing when his heart gave out. Hannah holding the flashlight while I tightened the last bolt. Neither of us saying much, just the lake slapping quiet against the pilings and her shoulder close enough to mine that I could feel the warmth coming off her jacket. You didn't have to do all this, she said that night on the dock, watching me test the cleat with my full weight. I wanted to. For my dad or for my mom or... She stopped herself. All of it, I said, because it was true, and because I wasn't ready yet to finish that sentence the way she'd left it hanging. She was quiet a minute. Out on the water, a loon called once, low and lonesome, the sound that always makes this whole lake feel bigger than it actually is. I think about you more than I tell anyone. She finally said, not looking at me, looking at the dark water instead. Denver's a good job. It's not a good life. I didn't figure that out until about month 3. I didn't say anything right away. Some things you let sit in the air a while before you touch them, the same way you let a fresh coat of varnish cure before you put any weight on it. Why didn't you say so? I asked instead of letting 14 months go by. Because I left, Mason. I don't get to leave and then turn around 6 months later and ask you to have been waiting. Her voice wobbled but held. That's not fair to you. Maybe I want to decide what's fair to me, I said. She looked at me then, really looked, the way she used to back before the moving truck and the Denver job offer and all the careful distance we'd both built since. I'm seeing someone, she said quietly. His name's Preston. It's not serious. I don't think it's serious. I don't actually know anymore. That landed about how you'd expect it to land, which is to say it landed exactly when it needed to, like a splash of cold lake water right when I was starting to forget how cold that water could get. Preston flew in 2 days later. On the morning Walter was finally cleared to go home for good. Like he timed his arrival around looking supportive without ever actually having to handle anything hard. I want to describe him fairly because that's only right. He was tall, well put together, the kind of tan that comes from a gym membership and not actual sunlight. He shook my hand with a grip that felt like he'd practiced it in a mirror, looked around the kitchen like he was pricing the appliances and said, "So this is the famous Cedar Falls," in a tone that made it clear he didn't think the word famous applied to anything within 50 miles of where we were standing. He'd flown in on day 7 of a crisis that started on day 1. He stayed for exactly 4 hours. I watched him through most of it, mostly because Hannah kept glancing my way every few minutes like she needed to check whether I was still standing there. Still steady, still real. Preston talked about a deal closing back in Denver that he couldn't be away from for more than a day. Talked about how Hannah really should think about a remote arrangement so she could check on her parents without disrupting her own trajectory. Used the word trajectory twice in one sentence in a way that made Walter, still pale and weak in his recliner, glance at me with an expression I'd seen him use exactly once before, the day a county inspector tried to shortchange him on a permit fee. "You didn't have to come all this way for half a day," Walter said to him, not unkindly, just plainly, the way he said most things. "I wanted to support Hannah," Preston said. Smiling, the kind of smile that's built for cameras instead of rooms. You support her by getting on a plane for 4 hours during the worst week of her year? Walter shifted in his recliner, wincing slightly. Son, I had a heart attack, not an inconvenience. You'll forgive me if 4 hours doesn't read as support so much as an appearance. The kitchen went quiet in that specific way that happens right before somebody decides whether to defend themselves or just leave. Preston chose the second option. Glancing at his watch, mentioning his car to the airport was already waiting outside. Out on the porch, walking him to his rideshare, I heard most of the rest of it through the screen door, because I wasn't trying that hard not to listen. I told you not to make a thing out of this, Preston said, low and clipped. Your dad's fine. The doctors said so. You're letting this whole small-town drama derail you, Hannah, and I need you sharp for the Whitmore presentation next week. My father had a heart attack, Hannah said, and her voice had gone very still in a way I recognized. The same stillness she'd had the morning she told me she was taking the Denver job. The voice she used right before she said something she'd already decided couldn't be argued with. I'm not derailed. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Hannah, you flew in for 4 hours and spent most of it talking about your deal, she said. I watched you do math in your head the entire time my mother was crying in the kitchen. That's not nothing, Preston. That tells me everything. I didn't hear what he said back because the rideshare pulled up right then and he got in it, and I stepped off the porch fast enough that nobody would think I'd been standing there listening the whole time, even though we both knew I had been. Hannah found me down by the dock an hour later. The same spot, the same lake, the cleat I'd fixed holding steady against the evening chop. She sat down on the bench beside me without asking, close enough that her knee touched mine. Neither of us moving to fix that. I called him on the drive to the airport, she said. Ended it. Properly this time, not the half version I'd been doing with you for 14 months. She let out a breath, long and shaky, like she'd been holding it for longer than just that day. He kept doing math the whole time he was here. I watched him do it. Cost of the flight against the value of being seen doing the right thing. That's not love. I'm not sure it ever was. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it, even though some small selfish corner of my chest was doing its own quiet math right then too. Don't be. She turned to look at me, lake light catching gold along the side of her face the way it does out here right before full dark. Mason, can I ask you something, and will you actually answer it instead of being careful with me? Yeah. Why did you really say yes when my mom asked you to stay the night? I thought about lying, the easy answer, the one about loyalty to her parents and good neighborliness and nothing more complicated than that. But I'd promised myself a long time ago, back when we were first together, that I wouldn't be the kind of man who handed out careful half-truths just to keep a room comfortable. Because the second I heard your mother's voice on the phone, the only thing I could think about was getting to a place where I might end up standing close to you again, I said. I told myself it was about your dad. It was about your dad. It was also about you. Both things were true at the same time. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away from me. I came home thinking I'd spend this whole week managing a crisis and going back to Denver exactly the same person who left here 14 months ago. She said, I didn't account for finding you in my mother's kitchen, cooking eggs like you'd never left. I never really wanted to leave, I said. I just didn't know how to ask you to stay without it sounding like I was asking you to give something up for me. Same way you didn't know how to come back without it sounding like you'd failed at something. That's an awful lot of two people not saying the actual thing for an awful long time, she said, and there was a wet laugh underneath it. We're slow learners. Apparently. She reached over and laced her fingers through mine on the bench between us, the way she used to without ever having to think about it. My dad's home. He's going to be okay. My mom's going to need help around here for a while during his rehab. I have vacation days stacked up that I have never once used in 3 years at that job. She squeezed my hand. I was thinking I might stay a few weeks. See how it feels being back here, not as an emergency, just as a person choosing it. I'd like that, I said, which didn't come close to covering what I actually felt, but it was a start, and some things you build slow on purpose, the same way I'd build a house, one true joint at a time instead of rushing the frame up before it's ready to hold weight. She stayed 3 weeks that turned into 3 months. Walter finished cardiac rehab by Thanksgiving, strong enough to argue with the doctor about getting back out on the boat by spring, which everyone in that family correctly understood as a full recovery. Diane stopped asking me to come for Sunday dinner because by December I was simply there every Sunday without being asked. Setting the table the way I used to before the moving truck. Except this time Hannah said it with me, our hands bumping over the same drawer of mismatched silverware her mother had owned since before either of us was born. Hannah didn't go back to Denver. She took the remote arrangement Preston had once suggested for entirely the wrong reasons, running her old job from a desk in her childhood bedroom for a few months before she finally walked away from it for good in the spring and started something of her own in town. A small consulting outfit that worked with shops like her dad's hardware store, the kind of family businesses that don't usually get anyone fighting in their corner. I helped her build the office, a little converted room above the store, sanded the floor myself, hung shelves she actually wanted instead of shelves some catalog told her to want. On a Tuesday night, almost a year to the day after that first phone call, I found myself standing in that same workshop behind my house, finishing the very same bookcase I'd abandoned the night Diane showed up soaked through under the hospital overhang. Hannah came out to find me, the way she did most evenings by then, wrapped in one of my old flannel jackets against the October chill, holding 2 mugs of coffee even though it was nearly 10 at night. You know, she said, handing me a mug, this is the exact bookcase you were building the night my mom called you. I noticed that. You're slow. I build things to last, I said. Doesn't mean I build them fast. She laughed, set her mug down on the workbench, and looked at the bookcase a long moment, running one finger along the grain of a shelf I just finished sanding smooth. My mother would like to know, she said carefully, whether you're planning on staying the night again tonight. She started phrasing it that way on purpose, by the way. She thinks it's hilarious. Your mother's a menace. My mother's the reason any of this happened at all, Hannah said, and she wasn't wrong. Diane had never once admitted it outright, but I'd come to understand over that year that the night she showed up at my door hadn't only been about Walter's heart. Some part of her had been hoping for a long time that a real crisis might finally do what 14 months of careful, polite distance never could, which was put her daughter and me back in the same kitchen long enough to remember what we actually were to each other. I set my mug down next to hers and pulled a small box out of my jacket pocket, one I'd been carrying around for about 3 weeks by then, working up the nerve in the same patient way I work up to any job that actually matters. I'd like to stay every night, I said. Not because anybody asked me to this time. Because I'm asking you if I can. Hannah looked at the box, then at me, and her eyes filled the exact same way they had on that dock the night she ended things with Preston. Except this time there wasn't a single thing underneath it that needed explaining. Yes, she said, before I'd even gotten all the way down on one knee, which made us both laugh so hard I nearly dropped the ring into a pile of sawdust, which would have been exactly the kind of detail her father would never have let either of us live down. We got married the following June, out on that same dock, the cleat I'd fixed holding up a string of little white lights instead of a boat line for once. Walter walked Hannah down to meet me, steady on his feet, healthier than he'd been in years, loudly informing every guest within earshot that he'd had the best cardiac event of his life because it finally knocked some sense into both of us. Diane cried through the whole ceremony, the good kind of crying, and afterward told anyone who'd listened that she'd known exactly what she was doing the night she knocked on my door in the rain. These days, when I drive past Birch Lane and see that porch light still burning whether anyone's expected home or not, I think about how close I came to just letting that phone ring out that Tuesday night, chisel still in my hand, pizza going cold on the bench. One missed call, and I might have spent another 14 months telling myself the distance was permanent instead of just unfinished. So let me ask you something before you go. If someone from your past called you in the middle of the night needing help, not the person you used to love, but the family that came with them, would you go? And has there ever been a person in your life who turned out to be the door you needed to walk back through, even after you were sure that door was closed for good? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this one got you, hit like so I know you're out there, subscribe and turn the bell on so you don't miss next Sunday's story.